Yves, Falcherove, you're very welcome back again to the fourth of our 4 evening sessions here in the Cathedral Hall at St. Eugene's Cathedral in Derry. The fourth of our 4 sessions in the evening to celebrate Catholic Schools Week 2021, where the theme has been this year and for this week, Catholic Schools, Communities of Faith and Resilience. And for the first 3 nights, I had the task of asking people questions and getting them to respond. Joyce Logue, principal of a primary school, Mark McConnell, head of RE in a big college, and then Evie Doherty last night, an 18-year-old student. Tonight, you may think that Father Paul Farren here, director of the Catechetical Institute, is going to ask me the questions. In fact, he simply is your mouthpiece, because we put an invitation out over this past few days for you to put in questions. Now, we've got a lot of questions back. Not all of them can be answered, but this is your spokesman, Father Paul Farren, this evening. He's speaking your questions to me, and we'll see how it goes. It's much easier to ask the questions than to have to answer them. Father Paul, it's over to you at this stage.
Thank you, Bishop, and good evening. Yes, we know you have faith, but we'll know at the end of this, have you resilience or not? You interviewed, as you say, the 3, Joyce and Mark and Evie, over the last 3 nights. Could you tell us what stood out for you from those 3 interviews?
Having been a school teacher for many years, I was bowled over by the commitment of those 3 people to their own personal faith journey. How articulate they were in terms of talking about the significance of faith to them, how they've all seen their commitment to teaching and their involvement in education as part of their personal vocation, their personal faith journey. So I really was bowled over by how strong they were, how proud they were of their faith, how meaningful it is to them, and I can only imagine the influence the adults must be having in the schools in which they work, and there are so many others like them, and how young people like Evie, one of, I think, 65 or something who are doing A-level RE in her school, like so many other schools, the influence they will have on one another by being able to talk about their faith. So actually it is that sense, boy, these are people where the faith is vibrant and they have a passion for communicating a way of looking at the world and looking at God and looking at the individual to the young people that they're with day in and day out. So I wanted to say, yippee, we are so blessed to have all of them in different roles in different schools.
Good. Well, the P4s in St. Ethna's Primary School have no difficulty questioning about their faith. So I have a few questions from them. The first from Darcy, and she's making her first Holy Communion this year.
Yes.
And she wants to know, can you remember way back to the day you made your first Holy Communion and what stands out for you?
I really have no memory of my first communion day at
Darcy,
all.
it was 94 years
Sorry,
ago.
Darcy. What I do have is a very clear picture of my first communion day. Me in my little short trousers and my little shirt and tie, standing beside a girl called Monica with our hands joined. So it looked like a wonderful day, but I must confess, Darcy, love, my memory of it is non-existent. And I just hope that you have much more memory going into the future of your first communion and your confirmation when you come to them.
Very good. In their school, they have a school prayer to St. Ethna. And Aoife wants to know, what's your favourite prayer and why?
Well, Jesus taught us one prayer, the Our Father, and I think it was good enough for Jesus to teach the apostles. It's definitely good enough for Donald McKeown because it says so much about who we are and who God is.
And Kate wants to know, who's your favourite saint and why?
Well, I suppose I have a real soft spot for St. Bernadette of Lourdes. Lourdes has been very significant to me. A little girl, unable to read and write at 14, Our Lady chose her, and Bernadette had that sense that she was like a brush. Our Lady used me and put me back in the cupboard again. That wonderful sense of simplicity before God. St. Bernadette, top of the list for me.
Okay. Now, during the lockdown, can you remember what was your most memorable Mass? Because that's what Callum wants to know.
Well, Callum, that would be very hard to say. I must say I try to pray all my Masses, sometimes with more concentration than not, because I know unless I'm praying at Callum, nobody else, I can't serve the people of God as well as I ought to. So I simply concentrate on the little light, little red light in the camera, and know that there are tens or hundreds or thousands out there, and my job is to lead them in prayer. So There hasn't been any special one. There have been difficult ones, Callum, because in a church on your own with nobody responding, it's a lonely place to be, and I know some priests find that very difficult. But I actually was given strength by saying there are people out there, my job is to bring good news to them, to bring the message of Jesus to them, and so it's more important what their memorable masses were rather than what mine were.
Good. And Aisling, she has more questions about the lockdown masses. She wants to know, and you have answered how you found celebrating Mass remotely, but she also asked, do you think this is the way forward for the Catholic Church?
Absolutely not. No, I think there's a phrase I learned a long time ago, belonging is an important part of believing. You know, love, that school is not the same if you're all sitting at home. We all like to be together, wherever, whether we're 8 or 10 or 80 or 100. We like to come together with other people. And I think Jesus wants to gather people so we can build relationships. And just consuming holy things and Mass on the screen, on the television, that's not the way forward. Jesus wants to build relationships. We're not just consumers who gobble up holy things and then go off on our own. He wants us to learn forgiveness and love and doing things together and supporting one another. And you can't do that on a screen.
Okay, and just 2 more questions from St. Ethna's. Do you remember the first wedding you did? And where was it and who was it?
Oh, I remember
Aidan wants to know that.
Aidan, I remember very well my first wedding. You see, I know you may think it's hard to believe, but I actually was a human being before I was a priest, you see. So I grew up.
You know what he is as a bishop?
Yeah, I grew up and I went to school and I had, as I say, short trousers for the first communion and all those things. And so, yes, I had a few weddings the year I was ordained, and they were mainly of people whom I'd been friendly with when I was growing up, and they said, Donald, would you be a celebrant for our wedding? Because they knew me as Donald, not as the priest, not as somebody who dropped down from the sky. So it was a number of people, including relations, who sort of said, Donald, as soon as you're ordained, will you do our wedding? So Mary was the first one to ask me to do her wedding.
Very good. Now, Jenna, the final question. Jenna she's preparing for Lent, and she would like to know what advice you would give her in deciding what her Lenten promise should be this year.
Well, I think everyone has to choose in their own circumstances what they're going to do. But I think Lent should be something that just pushes you a little bit outside where you feel comfortable, but not too hard, not too far. It may be going off some particular form of food. It may be putting some money in a troke or a box or whatever you may happen to have. It may be more regular in prayer or helping around the house, any of a number of things. But you decide what you can do that will be a blessing on you and a blessing on everybody else in the house. And if you try to do your best there, even if you slip occasionally, don't worry, love, keep working at it, Jenna. Lent lasts for a good 6.5 weeks, and you can pull yourself back up again and start again, because it's all saying, I'm fit to do great things, I'm fit to do tough things, I'm not pampered and soft. And Jesus says, I want you to be a hero, to be a saint, and Lent is a way of preparing for that big job.
Okay. So now we're going to go to Kevin, who's a teacher.
Okay.
And he has brought up the age-old issue that took a dramatic twist this year of the grammar education and the selection, and I suppose he describes it as the 2-tier educational system in Northern Ireland. And his question, one of his questions is, how does a 2-tier educational system here in the North follow the teaching of the Church, and specifically the teaching of Jesus, or does it?
Okay, I suppose I know from the city here that in many ways we don't have a 2-tier system. We have so many brilliant schools. Mm-hmm. My problem really is with the assumption that even though there's a whole range of abilities and talents in young people of 10 and 11, it's a crazy idea to think you can divide them into 2 groups on the basis of a 90-minute exam on a wet November morning. That simply is silly. And I think many people recognise that that's not sustainable as a way forward. I know there's pressure on many of the grammar schools, particularly from parents and potential parents, not to let go, but I know that so many of the leaders in those schools recognise that we have got to find a better way that gives priority not to institutions, but to the welfare of children, that gives priority not to those who are strongest and who will do well in any circumstances, but actually prioritises those who need most help and support. And there's a danger in what Kevin talks about as the two-tier system, that we end up thinking that only some people deserve a quality education. Unless we are, as Catholics, committed to looking after everybody, unless we have a different way of doing education from what secular society wants, then Pope Francis says we're actually wasting our time. We have to ensure that our priority is to the more disadvantaged, rather than just giving way to those who think they deserve to get perks on top of everybody else. So, no, I don't think you can divide people into two groups, and a system based on that really has very little to go on.
And how, Kevin wants to know, can you protect or care for maybe what we'd call disadvantaged schools when there's a drop in pupil numbers?
Well, I think solutions have to be found locally, because it's a buyer's market. Mm-hmm. Schools compete with one another with open nights and so on, so it's entirely up to parental choice. But I think if we find in somewhere like Derry City or Oma or wherever it happens to be that there's going to be a sustained drop in numbers, we have to actually get all the schools working to say, well, how can we ensure that we don't end up with some people benefiting and others losing? So that is a major challenge. If there's a demographic downturn, we have to ensure that the schools that perhaps for all sorts of historical reasons are not the most popular on the list, that they don't go to the wall, and we have a managed way forward. Because very often the pupils with the most needs are the ones who need to get most care and attention, and we can't leave them to the bottom of the heap or the end of the line. So yes, that is a challenge structurally, and if we have too many school places, we have to find out how we find ways of ensuring that they actually are. We have enough places and everyone's needs are looked after, not just everyone's desire for something better than the neighbour.
Okay, we're going to go to another teacher, Principal Fiona. She's a principal of a primary school, and her question is around the whole concept of Irish and what can be done to help CCMS fulfil their obligations to support and encourage Irish. And she asked this in the context of young people, children going to maybe preschool Irish, and then how does the Catholic educational system enable them to continue with their Irish?
Okay, Gurmila Magadas and Keshin, Fiona, thanks for that question. We have in Derry here the only CCMS primary school where all the teaching is done through Irish.
Yes, this is in Derry City.
In Derry City, correct, in Derry City. I think all the other Irish medium primary schools are not run by CCMS, are not church schools. Mm. They're run by other independent organisations under Corlin the Gael Sculliachta and so on. The challenge certainly for us in the city is actually to ensure that the one Scoil Columcille, the Irish medium primary school here, gets buildings that are worthy of the children who are in it. They've got very, very, very poor buildings. And we certainly have been fighting our corner, because I have no responsibility for in the other Irish-speaking primary school. We do try to ensure, for example, that the sacraments of First Communion and Confirmation, that they're available for those children who wish to celebrate them. We do them in Irish. Priests do it. I do some of them myself. And I think certainly in Derry we have enough space. In Derry City, we have enough space for those children who want primary school education. And then we have Gael College together out in Dungiven, as well as I know St. Bridget's here in Gallia would have a good emphasis on pupils who wish to learn through Irish as well. But yeah, I'm certainly committed, as somebody who's a love for the language myself, committed to do everything I can. But most Irish schools are not under my control or under CCMS's control. So there's a limit to what we can do within the Catholic managed sector, even though relationships are very, very good between most of the schools.
Okay. We're going to go to Kate now, who's a parent, and she's obviously a parent in a rural area. And the school in a rural area is usually quite small, but it's also a focus for the community. And her question is about what can you do in your role again as the chairman of CCMS, but also as the bishop? What can you do to ensure or to help to keep the small school in the small community as the focal point, rather than all having to go to the town?
That's been a struggle for a long, long time. My mother was principal up until 1968 of a small rural primary school, bearing the wonderful name of Farren. That's definitely a Northern Ireland name, Farren.
Yes.
And Farren closed in 1968, and the two teachers had to come into to the big school. So schools have been closing, partly because rural areas are becoming increasingly depopulated. There were larger numbers in the past. The main driver is certainly not myself or the church. It's the Department of Education, which is not prepared to maintain more places than we have children for. And I know there are enormous advantages in rural schools in terms of people knowing one another and closeness and community and so on. The school where my mother went herself is still flourishing way out in the middle of nowhere. And the school my father went to has got a nice new school maybe 15, 20 years ago. So they are vitally important. But schools will stay open as long as there are enough parents prepared to send their children to the schools to make the schools financially and educationally viable. Once schools go below a certain number, it's very difficult to maintain large numbers of small schools with small numbers where the range of educational opportunities to pupils are not guaranteed. But if the pressure wasn't coming from the Department of Education, I wouldn't be looking to close any of those schools, whatever.
You would keep them all. Shauna is another parent, and she has two interesting questions. One is the question of praying before class, and I presume it's in the post-primary sector, that doesn't happen perhaps in all schools, and what is your opinion about each class beginning with a prayer?
Well, on the broader picture, there's that famous phrase from, I think, Lord Halifax or something about a couple of hundred years ago saying, education is what remains after you've forgotten all you were ever taught. It's the person you become, it's the assumptions that you pick up, it's the way of looking at the world and looking at people, it's the lessons you learn through interaction. So I think prayer before a class on its own mightn't mean a lot. If it's part of a larger program, if the school can say, yes, we are committed to handing on the Catholic worldview, which is very distinctive from a secular worldview. Prayer at the beginning of class may well be one of the things, but on its own, that doesn't guarantee anything. You know, having taught in post-primary education for 23 years, I do know that we have to find ways of competing with the enormous pressures of the secular worldview, which says you're worth it, obey your thirst, life's too short to say no, and all of those things. That is a huge task we have. So prayer before a class may be part of that, but I think a school has to think through its strategy for ensuring that there's an ambience, that there's an atmosphere in the school that is formative, that there's a hidden curriculum, that there's an unspoken message coming across in all that the school does to ensure that people can leave the school, like Evie last night, with a real sense of the importance of the divine dimension, the transcendent, that frees us from that, what Pope calls the one-dimensional technocratic worldview that says nothing's important other than the pound on the ground when I'm around. And that engages with a young person's imagination. So yes, prayer can be part of that, but that on its own is not a sufficient strategy. That can just be seen as purely empty, unless it's part of a faith formation, a moulding of generous young hearts, an inspiration of them to love, to build community, to forgive, to leave the world a better place, as Pope Francis says, than it was when they arrived. Part of a bigger picture is really the challenge for us as Catholic educators in the 21st century, when there's so much of an alternative message being thrown at us.
And you mentioned their moulding of hearts, of young people's hearts, and that connects to the second question Shauna has, because she's speaking about the difference between building young people's self-confidence and enabling them to have an oversized ego, is the phrase that she uses.
Yes.
You know, and how as parents do you discern which is which, and how do you do it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think certainly we all know what an oversized ego is. There's an awful lot of bleeps who are there as role models for our young people who seem to be so fascinated with themselves. I have a real sense that those who have huge egos actually are people who find it hard to love themselves. Mm-hmm. What Christ tells us is that we are infinitely valuable, not because of what we have achieved, not because of it's all of our own making, but that my self-worth, my dignity is a gift from the God who made me in the image and likeness of the divine. So that's where, yes, in a secular sphere you may wonder what an overblown ego and self-respect can be like, because you can actually end up having people with an overblown ego and no sense of self-respect. Mm-hmm. I think the sense of there being a God who knows you by name, who's formed you in the palm of his hand, who calls you to be a saint, to be a wonderful person, that is the source of a healthy, collaborative sense of your own self-worth. And there are so many people who find it hard to love themselves or to love their story, and the sacrament of reconciliation is about finding peace with your past. Prayer is about looking at the Lord who knows you and to whom you are precious, who believes your life's infinitely valuable. I think that's a balanced approach to both being aware of your own self-worth, but aware that you complement the group that you belong to. That old phrase I often like to use, none of us is as smart as all of us. In the body of Christ, we're all living cells with unique contributions, that people have all sorts of different gifts. And I think it actually is developing a Christian view is having a wonderful sense of the dignity of all of us together. Individually we're wonderful, together we're absolutely fabulous. And I think the Christian message gives us a very healthy balance there. Encourage your child to learn and to study, and encourage them to love others and to be loved by others, and she won't have to worry about the difference between an overblown ego and self-respect.
Yes. Another question that came in had to do with holistic education, and that was the question pertaining from Damien, and his question was about, the way you have 3 or 4 A levels, and is that too narrow a focus at that age, and would it be more holistic, maybe to be more like the Republic of Ireland that have more subjects for their leaving certificate?
I think certainly England, Wales and Northern Ireland would be on their own in terms of the global thing. Abitur in Germany, Maturità in Italy, the Leaving Cert in the Republic, and so on. They're all based on a wide range of subjects. Some may be core subjects and other subjects beside it. That was why some years ago they brought in the AS and the A2 to try and encourage people not to specialise too definitively at the age of 16. So I think probably we've become so focused on getting grades that we forget that education really is to enable the person to be a wonderful human being, not just to give them qualifications, because you can be qualified, highly qualified, and feel very lonely and unfulfilled. It's enabled you to be a person who knows they are loved by God, a person able to build relationships, and a person able to contribute to the local community. You don't need 3 A levels for that. So I think, yes, a broader emphasis, which Catholic education does give to educating the human person in all of the facets of their lives, that's a much more healthy approach than an excessively competitive, market-driven, exam-based, assessment-driven focus on education, which dehumanizes people in many ways and just makes them gatherers of qualifications.
Okay, we're coming near the end, but we're going to go to St. Eugene's Primary School, and there was a few children there in Primary 7 who had a few questions. And the first question is from Hannah, and she says, are there any changes that you have made during this pandemic to connect to people that you're going to keep doing when it's over?
That's a wonderful question, Hannah. I think we've all probably discovered that there are so many ways we can contact people and gather people remotely on Zoom and webcams and so on. I think that's a very, very good question. And schools will have to do the same thing. Having done a lot of teaching online, Hannah, we're going to have to say, what do we want to leave behind of the old ways? What do we want to retain that we've learned during the pandemic to ensure that, Hannah, you and your classmates get the best possible education and can fly and love yourselves and know that God loves you too?
And then Bella, maybe you have answered Bella's question because it's very detailed in that, she talks about the challenges that we had to overcome during the pandemic, and moving forward, she asked, what's the aim of Catholic schools in regard to a holistic education?
Yeah, I think it's to enable people not only to survive but to thrive in a very rapidly changing environment. So it means beginning with a strong sense that you are loved and precious to God, that God has a dream for the wonderful person that you can become, love. And to know that whatever the circumstances, even difficult ones like a lockdown, can actually be times when we are still able to learn. When we don't get things our own way is not necessarily a bad time. Which brings us right back to the whole idea of Lent. It's not just satisfying the hungers that we have, but realizing that challenges actually can bring out the best in us. And if you approach challenges with that attitude, whatever happens to your love during life, you'll be as resilient as the resilience that we celebrate in our theme for Catholic Schools Week 2021.
And Dara's question is perfect then. Can you explain why confirmation is so important at this time in a primary 7's life?
Confirmation is the Spirit of God being given to us to make us saints, to make us heroes. The world is in a mess in many ways, and Jesus says, will you follow me? Do you want to get wisdom and courage and understanding and knowledge and all of those things so that you can go out and be a blessing on this world? Because so often our secular culture says, enjoy yourself, have plenty of money, have a bit of crack, don't grow up, don't take too much responsibility. Jesus says the world will not be changed by people who go down that route. It'll be changed by heroes who say, give me wisdom and courage. Lord, I want those gifts. Holy Spirit, come into my heart, and you young people are the ones who will change the face of the earth, and we're depending on you to do that. And the Lord says, open your heart and I will give you all the gifts you need to be a hero, to be a saint.
And the final thing, and you can answer it in one sentence. If I was a parent, why should I send my child to a Catholic school?
Because we have a dream for what your child can become. We are not going to cram stuff into their head. We are going to make them blossom. And we are committed to that in a very materialistic, very secular world, which doesn't seem to have anything other than just one dimension to their lives. God has a dream for them. We want to communicate that dream.
I have no more questions.
There we are. There we are. I think we're nearly finished. I think it probably is the end of our session this evening. Yes, it's different being at the questioned person's end of the dialogue. Thank you to all of you who have joined us over this past couple of nights. It's been great to be able to dialogue with you. I hope, as one of our young people said, this is one of the sort of things we can continue with well into the time after the pandemic is over. Thanks to Father Paul this evening, to our other speakers earlier on, thanks to all those who organised the technicalities. I think this has been a good experience. Please God, we can learn from it, and who knows where the Lord is going to lead us right through 2021. Good night, God bless, Slán agus Beannacht.